Hey folks, welcome to Bear Mountain today. We're working on a different project today. It's called building a worm tower. And the idea behind this is that if you actually make kind of a small worm bin in your garden itself, it can help improve the fertility of the soil in your garden bed. So let's get started. I'll show you all the parts. Okay, one of the primary drivers of why I wanted to do this was our worm bins that we've been using for making worm castings for our potting mixes and that sort of stuff in the spring. We've kind of maxed out the capacity of the worm bins itself, and we still have a lot of great organic material that would be very easy to continue, building out worms. But from our potting standpoint, we really don't need any additional capacity. So I thought what would be a great way of maybe taking advantage of these worms is to create what's called a worm tower. Now there's lots of different designs for this all over the internet. Some people use, small PVC piping or pipes that are maybe 4 inches or 6 inches in diameter. But we had some old food grade buckets, 5-gallon buckets left. And I thought, maybe that would be actually a better thing because it would give more space for the worms to actually kind of do their thing. In essence, what we're doing here, a worm tower, is basically recreating a worm bin, but it's probably 2/3 to 3/4 buried in the actual soil itself. So the warmth of the soil and the insulating capacity of the soil, particularly in a temperate climate like where we are in Zone 8B, on the western coast of Oregon, or western side of Oregon, we don't really get good soil freezing temperatures for very long, or if we do, it really doesn't freeze the soil that deep. So making a worm bin outside on a year-round basis actually has a pretty high level of success, unless we get into some weird Arctic event. These things happen. But the whole idea on this would be I would be able to feed excess materials into this, and it would create the worm castings. And by periodically, maybe when the conditions are right, filling the bucket with water and letting stuff leach out into the bed, the actual benefits and the nutrients of the worm castings would help the individual plants in this bed. So what we did is we took a bed that's kind of a shape that's a little bit hard to reach in some cases, to the center of it, and we look at it and say, well, if we took maybe just a corner of it at the high side, because it's kind of on a slope too a little bit, that it would probably be the best beneficial way to deal with maybe getting like a fan of nutrients out towards the center of the bed. And so that's kind of our idea behind it. Now, a worm tower is very simple. I mean, we'll show you the construction of it, but it's just basically a 5-gallon bucket. We go up halfway, we drilled some aeration holes in it and cut out the bottom, and we have some form of a top. It doesn't have to be airtight top. Just the basics of it is what you're trying to do is prevent the thing from getting flooded out in the wintertime, or something coming in and digging in it, like a rodent of some type or another. And this bucket is going to be buried in the ground probably right about up to here. We're going to leave maybe about 2 to 3 inches above the ground, and the rest of it's going to be buried. So this will leave a good 12-inch depth for the worms to do their thing. So when we put in the materials, this is actually, worms do most of their work in the top 6 or 8 to 12 inches or so of wherever they're working, because this is what they are. They're decomposers of organic material. We're going to be using the same red wigglers that we use in our worm bin. So these were all native captured here on the farm itself. So we didn't import anything at all. The only outside thing is an old bucket. And then we took some 1/4 inch, I guess it's about 1/4 inch, hardware cloth. And we cut just kind of a little wire mesh to put down at the bottom of the hole, with the idea being that this will kind of slow down a rodent from burrowing into it from underneath. But honestly, if a rodent really wanted to work on it, they can probably squeeze through one of these holes. So this one's kind of like, I think, is just good to slow them down more than anything else, and maybe if they get discouraged, they'll just go on to something easier to go after. The sides of the holes are for moisture coming in and out. The worms themselves, unless there's a real high organic material compound, you know, in our bed here, they're probably going to stay most of their time inside of the worm tower itself, although they may migrate out a little bit. They mostly will probably stay in the tower itself. So the first step is we just need to dig a hole. Okay, we've dug the hole, took the excess soil and kind of set it aside, because what we're going to do is, once we set the bucket down, is we're going to pack some of this soil around it, and then the rest of it will just lightly spread over the top of the rest of this bed. This is the end of the season for us, so the last step we'll do once everything is in place is we'll put some urban compost over the top, basically to kind of give it an insulating blanket for the winter. And then this bed will be, we'll put in like early spring greens, and hopefully, you know, we'll have some vermicast in here that will have leached some nutrients out, or be ready to leach nutrients out by spring. We could also then maybe, if it's getting too full, reach out and occasionally put some of the vermicast out on the bed itself. So
does the bed need to have a cover crop?
You know, you can do that. Options are, we're kind of doing the kind of a Charles Dowding method here, where our way of protecting the soil is to put compost over the top and let a slow rot. And then we're going to plant greens in here, you know, as soon as the weather permits us to do that. But in other cases, yeah, people could just put, you know, a cover crop in, particularly if it's something that, you know, maybe winter kills down, like oats or something like that, you know, in a colder climate. Or they could put a mulch on of some kind, or they could grow some clovers or things of that nature. The whole point, though, on this is kind of a bit of a permaculture approach. Is what we're trying to do is make the nutrients produced in the spot where they're closest to being used. This technique can also be used for big raised beds too. So like, I know a lot of folks have been building quite elevated raised beds. In some cases, you know, they could be up to 2 feet in height. This technique is really a great idea for, you know, just adding something in there that will continually make fertility available pretty close to where you're growing your plants. So again, you know, as the thing gets maybe too full, you can take some of the solid vermicastings and compost and just kind of lay it out and, you know, put it around your plants itself. So I don't want to bury a cat. So carrots, you gotta get back, buddy. So
He's our helper.
We dug the hole. We put the wire mesh down on the bottom of it. The next step is pretty easy. We're just gonna, you know, put our bucket in here and kind of make sure it's placed pretty good. I'm gonna take the top off for that, just to make, I want to make sure there's good contact. And if you look at the inside, what you can see is that it is, you know, pretty good contact. And so there's not that much to backfill around the sides. So we're gonna have a bit of excess soil, but that's okay.
The reason I asked about cover crop is that you had said in the past you don't want to leave, you want to put an armor on the bed that you're growing in, and so that's why I was asking, should a cover crop be put on this, since we're opening this one up, it has nothing on it.
Yeah, I would do that if it was a larger area, but like this is kind of an intense area in a sense that we're always going to be raising stuff in here, from, you know, greens to, you know, seasonal things. So the idea would be is as we get this thing, you know, really rocking in production, that you know, if we plant a cover crop now, it probably wouldn't be finished until like April.
It's not going to stay fallow very long.
Right. So like we'll be planting stuff in here, you know, in a couple of months. Yeah. So starting like late February, we'll be putting in some cole crops or greens.
It could be January.
It could be, yeah. But basically, once we'll be putting stuff back in the garden once we get into that point where the day length is greater than 9.5 hours. And for us, that's like right around the end of January. So that's when things, we notice in February, things start to come back alive again and start growing again. And that's when we'll put our spring stuff in. So if we had a cover crop in here,
it wouldn't be
done yet, and then we would have an issue of, okay, terminating the cover crop.
What was the point?
Yeah, and it's almost like, so the best method for us in this intensely gardened area is to put a armor on, so to speak, of compost.
Right.
And that's kind of the whole concept behind it. Now, one of the things I do want to move towards is in my pathways, I want to get away from not having living pathways. I want to get, or I should say, I don't want to get away from it. I want to get to that goal where I have low growing things and that there's always something green in the pathways themselves.
That can be walked on.
It can be walked on. Maybe it doesn't, have to be mowed as much. Kind of a low maintenance type thing. And that could be, some forms of herbs or low growing, hopefully clumping type grasses. And that's still something we're still kind of working on trying to figure out. So this soil, this is this was our third season since we took the blackberries out. And it's really, the soil's improved dramatically.
It's been here though, since we moved in. It just was used tremendously and then neglected, and back to using it tremendously.
Yeah. Well, in this day and age, what we want to do is try to, use this, I think, for as much of our food production as we can. And this is just an easy way.
Better. Food just tastes better when you grow it yourself.
Yes, it does. So you can see we got it buried in, and that is all there is really to the installation. So the rest of the soil, what we'll do is we'll spread it evenly out on the bed, and then we'll probably put a layer of compost. So basically, once this thing is all finished up, all you're going to see is this lid. And
it's
that's
not
it.
a pretty thing in my garden, but if it helps me produce better veggies, I'll be really happy.
One of the things that we can do, and we should do, is when we plant, kind of take this into account and try to make things so we can maybe shade this over a little bit, or maybe it's a little more covered. But it's pretty well insulated because this guy is down, 12 inches. And
so you already spotted some worms in there. And this soil grew really tremendous cucumbers.
Yeah, we had tons of cucumbers off of it.
So, it looks like it's going to be a really good bed for this experiment.
Right, so the next step is we're going to build this just like we would a brand new worm bin. So what we want is we want a fair amount of carbon in it. Probably I go for kind of like trying to get to about 60% carbon, or maybe even a little more, 65%. And carbon for us is something that's really easy and cheap. It's just cardboard. This is all just wetted down cardboard. And we're going to throw that down at the bottom of it as a base. Worms love cardboard. And that'll also give a bit of aeration.
Is there any kind of negativeness from the cardboard, like glues and tape and...
all the tape's taken off, so there isn't any stickers or tapes or anything like that. But there is some folks have said that, that there is some things in the glue that might be toxic, but I kind of look at it from the standpoint, worms thrive on this stuff. So I'm not really certain that's really an issue. I've also heard that in a lot of cases that the glues are plant-based, You know, a lot of these guys in these cardboard factories, because it's cheap to make glue out of wheat or corn rather than something synthetic and petroleum based. So from that standpoint, because corn and wheat are subsidized in the United States to such a degree, it's probably actually cheaper to use, you know, something based on that than there is something based on you know, some fancy fossil fuel chemical. Now, that being said, of course, there is no laboratory test. These are cardboards from a variety of sources, so is there a chance that there might be something in it? I've not encountered anything that's been negative to the worms or negative to the plants that I've been raising, and so far I'm still alive, so. Okay, food. This is really just basic household salad waste, some paper towels used to just that have no soap or chemical residues or anything like that, torn up paper towel rolls, and a lot of veggie waste and coffee grounds. So that's just the basics of what I'm going to put in. Is I'm going to fill this up about a third, and then I'm going to put a little more cardboard in here just for a little more carbon. And then we harvested a whole bunch of red wigglers from our compost bin. And these guys are going in. They don't like light, so I'm gonna get them out of the light. And there's a little bit of the compost, the vermicomposting I've been working on, so they'll kind of feel like a little bit at home. And I'm just going to mix them up a little bit, get them exposed to the food, and put a little more food on top, like the rest of it. Now, there's plenty of moisture in here. The cardboard's wet. The foods themselves are wet. There's lots of carbon in here. And I'm just going to throw a little bit more wetted cardboard on top just for an insulation layer. And worms, the great thing about these guys, under good conditions, meaning anywhere from 65 to 85 degrees, but their optimum is they like about a 65 to 70 temperature. They will double in about 40 days. So every 40 days, while there's food, they're going to double to the size of their food source that they have in here. So it's just going to be a matter of kind of checking on them every once in a while, adding a little more stuff in it, because once they get rocking and rolling, this stuff will start dropping down. And then once we kind of like say, okay, we get to that point where, say, we've got to drop down really good, particularly starting next spring, what we'll do is every once in a while take the lid off, basically fill the thing with water, and temporarily it'll look like, oh my God, we're drowning them, but we're really not. We're going to be rinsing a lot of those nutrients down into the soil, and since this is so coarse material, this will pretty quickly get to a point where, you know, the water's gone, and it won't bother the worms to be temporarily, you know, flooded with a bit of water. And probably then again by early spring, we may be able to actually lift some of the material out of here and just kind of spread it around when we do a planting. So think about it this way: when you get ready to start to plant, you already got a bucket of fertilizer right here.
Cool.
This is all there is to it. We put the lid on. It's not airtight, so they can get air.
Enough that something
but it's
won't
tight
come
enough
in
that something
dig.
can't come in and dig in it.
Okay.
So, and there's air in the soil, and there's holes in the side, and there's air into the thing itself, so it shouldn't go anaerobic. So the whole point is just like that.
So that's a worm.
That is a worm tower. That's all there is to it.
Worm castle?
Worm castle. So anyway, folks, we just kind of wanted to share this with you. It's a real quick tip to do easy vermicasting. If you want to do this, you know, without having worm bins and you know, separated aside and all that kind of stuff.
Or your worm bin is getting full.
Yeah, or your worm bin's getting full, or, you know, you just say, hey, you know, I don't want to be harvesting worm castings all the time, doing all that kind of stuff. I mean, I like the idea of, you know, recycling my household waste into it. But honestly, you know, if it could just find an easier way to get it into the garden, well, it's already here in the garden. So it's got a real positive to it. The other thing too is if your bokashi, if you didn't want to do a digester for your bokashi as a second step, you could put something like this in some place maybe that's closer to perennial plants and do the same idea. Mix it with bokashi, mix enough carbon into it so you could take your fermented bokashi and put it in here as well. And the worms would love that too. So, any questions? I feel like David S. Pumpkins. And if you don't know who David S. Pumpkins is, you should Google it.
Oh, come on. No, I don't have any questions.
Okay, folks. Thanks for watching today, and stay safe. And as always, we'll catch you on the next video. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.